kingdom's new day. He's broken my bondage, and my spirit's free, for God is revealing His Son in me. Expression of God's holy word, becoming expression of Jesus, my Lord. He came to my vessel, and He caused me to see that He delights in expressing His substance through me, and becoming expression. Well, I've come to my end, becoming expression. My spirit now bliss, in Him I am swallowed, and now I am free, that a fuller expression may come forth in me. For God is revealing His Son in me, and His Spirit of life has set my soul free. His word is becoming a reality, for God is revealing His Son in me. Get a play, of course. I will bless the Lord and give Him glory. I will bless your name and give you glory.
A lot taller than that. Oh, shit. I just broke this. Yeah, I did. We're gonna have to have that light thing again. Yeah, that permanent deal come loose. All right. Well, it'll work like that. Keep it shielded. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Elise. Okay, I want to talk about something that I've shared a couple of times. Well, one time really, and I'm just going to tell you I'm going to jump around. So, buckle the seatbelt. It's going to go from here to there. I'm going to try to put a couple things together this morning that I've been talking about recently. For some time I've been doing a study on knowing the truth, and of course from John chapter 8, you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free. And the distinction of that and what we think knowing the truth really is, because most of the time we think knowing the truth is knowing scriptural, doctrinal things, knowing the Bible. Well, I know the Bible. Okay. Do you know the truth? So, because according to what Jesus says, there is a bondage or a liberty that's associated with whether or not you're knowing the truth. So it's an important thing, I would think. Most people are in the bondage part, still claiming knowing the truth. And I was there a long time, and at certain times I'm still exposed to be there. But I want to talk about something first before I get to that, and it all has to do with the nature of our salvation. Andrew Murray says that the real problem with believers is that they do not understand the makeup of our salvation. They do not understand its nature, and that is that it is 100% spirit. Now we believe, Christianity believes, not us in this room, hopefully, but Christianity believes that, because we're going to talk about a conversation I had not too long ago with someone, that until it comes and reaches us, as far as something that heaven reaching and meeting earth, where it's now evidenced in natural flesh and blood, then it's not real. And the conversation went like this. It was to me, the question was posed, when is this going to actually be real? And I know the frustration of that question, or I know where it comes from. I know that frustration. When's it going to be real? Well, it is real. And just saying that to someone is not an answer to their question. The only answer to their question is seeing the one who makes it real. But when you say that to someone, they think you're kind of pushing the question aside and not wanting to answer it, because we want principles to live by. We want things to apply to ourselves that make it accessible and make it eventually demonstrative to the world. Well, the world didn't see it when Jesus was manifesting Jesus to the world. So I don't think we're going to have much more success. And that's part of the thing I want to talk about, is that our salvation is spirit, and the reason we get caught up in these bondages that we're talking about, or the bondage we're talking about, is due to the nature of our salvation. The nature of our salvation is the majority of the time answered by the natural mind, by the flesh, with what we're going to talk about, and that is idols, building idols. Why? Because we don't see something we believe needs to be seen. We can't observe what we believe needs to be observed. And this all kind of spurred from and it was confirmed when I got there, the conference in South Carolina when I was there. On the way there, I listened to a radio show, and the guy was I don't know what he was, a preacher or something. And he was talking about living by Christian principles and applying principles and Christian principles to live a spiritual, well-rounded spiritual life. And so I sat there and listened, just to listen, have something to listen to on the 14-hour trip. And he finally got to the point that I knew he was going after. He finally said, our Christianity, salvation is not a person. Salvation is not a person, it is principles. And these principles must be applied to our lives. And I began to think, oh my God, that's wrong in so many obvious ways. If I said something like that, I'd kind of try to move out of the way of the lightning bolt that I thought was going to come down and get me. But, he just out flat said it that directly. I thought, man, this is a guy who has been trained, because at the beginning of the broadcast, he was very sure to give his training in theology. And so he's been trained in theology and all the biblical sciences and all of that. And yet, this is his conclusion, is that salvation is, a bunch of learned theological principles that we apply to ourselves to try to assure that we're going to live acceptably to God. And this has to do with the nature of our salvation, and this conclusion has to do with that. And I want to talk about that just for a moment. And it has to do with the same argument that Paul had in the Galatian letter, Colossian letter. And it wasn't that they were going off the deep end into what we call sin. It was about they were attempting to serve God in a way that was not appropriate, in a way that was contrary to the nature of the salvation that they had received. They were attempting to, we could go into Hebrews 6, but they were attempting to lay again or to bring into a spiritual context what they were familiar with that had visibility and externality. And they pointed to that and said, that's what it means to be holy. And the only thing that keeps you from building again those principles, elementary things that pointed to the Messiah, is seeing the Messiah. Is a soul actually coming to behold the one that entire age of testimony pointed to. The woman at the well. She came with her pot, came to Jacob's well. It's significant. It was Jacob's well. Well, here comes the true well sitting on Jacob's well, and she didn't realize who he is, so he asked her for water. And there's this interaction, of course, and then he says, if you just knew the gift of God that was here, you would ask of me water. You wouldn't come to this antiquated well, this thing that's been superseded by my presence. You wouldn't come here any longer. You'd come to me, and I'd give you water that you'd never have to come here again. I'd bring it from the external that you need over and over to an inward working of the Spirit. And yet, she told him, we know the Messiah is coming. We know something. Here's what we know. We know the Messiah is going to come, and when he comes, he's going to declare or make clear, tell us all things, show us all things. And he says, I am he. I'm the one. And immediately she left her water pot. the means to draw out of that antiquated well. She just dropped it, went to her city. And what did she say? We were talking about this last Wednesday night. What did she say to her people? She didn't say, let me teach you about a man. Now, she had experienced this man in his presence, and so she had a lot she could say about him. But she understood that wasn't sufficient. She understood they had to come and see a man for themselves. You cannot substitute another person's experience with him for yourself. There is a seeing of him that's necessitated with all of us. Otherwise, we're going to be locked in the bondage of theology, principle, concepts, belief systems, religious zeal and effort, and miss the whole point. And be in that bondage. And this is what I want to talk about. It's principles versus the person. And we're going to talk about why men desire principles instead of the person. Now, I've talked about this before. Some of you, this is something not new you've heard from me, but what they had taken, the people, the Jews, had taken, I'm going to talk about when it was a legitimate testimony. When the Jews, when it was a testimony, not what we have today and made up a bunch of stuff, but a God-given testimony. They had taken that testimony and they had made it principles to apply to themselves to live by. And so by those principles or their adherence to them and all of that, they believed they had achieved some standard of holiness, righteousness, and all of that. But what they had taken as principles for living, Paul was declaring as a testimony of a life who would come and live in them. And Paul was declaring that life had come. They could carry on attempting to apply those spiritual principles forever and still miss the whole point. Still miss reality. Not saying that reality didn't dwell in them, but they didn't know the reality that was dwelling within them. I mean, it's like when people say, Christ is all. He is life. He is righteousness. He is holiness. And we say those. It's words that just fly over people's heads or around or whatever. But we could say all of that. All of the words. And when we say He is all, He is everything, He's the substance of it all. It's like Christians hear that and they say, well, yeah, but doesn't that take away from my responsibility in this thing? What's your responsibility? Your responsibility is to know Him. See, we think our responsibility has to do with some kind of a demonstration. And that's why men love principles, because principle demands demonstration. Principles, theologies, concepts, doctrines, they demand some type of manifestation. And I think it's because of a lack of faith that we hold to those things. Faith doesn't need it. Faith sees Him as the only evidence necessary. Faith doesn't need other demonstration. In fact, faith beholds a demonstration that's so much more real than anything you can demonstrate with whatever you try to do. I pray 50 times a day. Okay. You could be praying with a lack of faith. And you could fast with no faith. Paul did it all, I'm sure, before he saw Christ. I mean, the whole point of the law, Paul says, was you were kept under the law until faith came, not until you could finally do it. When you were able to do this without the constraint of a law, then the new covenant was so. No, it was until faith came, which means the law kept you under until the reality of its testimony came and you could receive all the fullness the law demanded by Him and as Him. See, faith is a person. Faith is a person. Faith is not some type of deal that We think it is. It is a person. Faith, living according to faith is not about believing it until it's manifested in the earth. It's about beholding Him that the earth can never behold. Beholding Him who can't be seen in that way. And seeing a reality that the natural world will never see. Not in you or me or anybody. The kingdom does not come with observation. I mean, it was true when He said it, and it's true now. But why do men love it? Why do men love principles, doctrine, theology? It's the same thing as saying men love darkness rather than light. The same thing. Why do they love principles? Men love darkness. Why? Because darkness, principles permit what the person will not. Darkness permits what the light will not. Religion permits what revelation will not. And that is the very thing Paul speaks against in his Galatian letter, of trying to make the spirit and the flesh work together and co-labor to produce some kind of a spiritual end. And he says, these things are enmity one to another, so that you cannot do the thing that you desire to do. What is that? Be holy by fleshly means, even religiously motivated fleshly means. It's still flesh. It's like circumcision in the flesh, uncircumcision in the flesh. It's both in the flesh. Neither of them avail anything but a new creation in Christ, where He is all. But we love it. And we're after that. Ignorance permits what knowledge doesn't. So when we talk about spiritual principle, we talk about something that sounds very appealing to the flesh. And this has to do with what we're going to talk about with the hiddenness of our salvation and the adultery of the heart. But it starts here. This is a way to lead up to it. And we see in Romans 7 a man who looks back at his time under the principles laid out by the law, trying to live those principles. And guess what? This book is the greatest culprit to the deception. Right here. Now, those who didn't turn me off, then keep listening. Because it is. These are words that are excellent words. Proverbs 22, I've written unto you excellent things of wisdom. They're excellent words. But when they're applied to the wrong thing, or when you believe they're talking about another person than Christ, they're the most deceptive. This is the most deceptive script ever. That's why most doctrines that are false are scripturally devised. And we're going to talk about that. The difference between words of truth and words of vanity. As it's said in the scripture, what's the difference between the two? But again, it has to do with the nature of our salvation. The nature of our salvation is said a couple of times in Colossians. I can read that so nobody will say I didn't read anything. Colossians chapter 2, verse 2, that their hearts might be comforted, being knit together in love, and unto all riches, the full assurance of understanding, to the acknowledgement of the mystery of God, of the Father, who is Christ, in whom are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And I'm going to read verse 4 because this is going to be important later. And this I say, lest any man should beguile you with enticing words. What is he saying? What did he say to them to make them pause from listening to enticing words? The wisdom and understanding, the riches that you seek for, they're hidden in a very specific place. Meaning they can only be found in a very specific place. The good news is you're in that place. And that place is in you. It's not afar off. He's in you. But there's a necessity here. And unless that necessity, and we set our hearts for God to make known that reality, we will answer the hiddenness of our salvation with the idols that we set up in our own hearts. We will answer it. Colossians 3, we know that your life is hidden with Christ in God. And what's the necessity set forth in the next verse? Set your affection on that which is above, and when Christ who is our life shall appear. There's the necessity that matches the hiddenness of our salvation. The fact that it's hidden in Christ demands a setting of the affection to know Him and His appearing. Otherwise, you're going to be locked in principles, and I remember years ago, God spoke into my heart and said, your principles have become principalities. They've become strongholds. And it's because you're there. And the reason I said this is the greatest deception is what Paul says. Paul said that. He said the law. Let me go there. Romans chapter 7. The commandment, this is verse 10, the commandment which was ordained to life I found to be unto death. It wasn't that it killed you. It was that it exposed you had no life. It exposed that you were not the possessor of the life it demanded and testified of. The commandment which was ordained to life I found to be death for sin. Now that's not something Paul did, that's who Paul is. He talks about the law that was in his members that governed him inwardly, and it was the law of sin and death. So it said the sin that was in him took occasion by the commandment. The sin that's in him can read this book. Okay? The governing thing, sin, law of sin and death reads this book. And by the commandment deceived him and slew him. What does that mean? That means this book that talked about holy and righteousness and being perfect before God as God is perfect. And the law of sin and death that desires, it's the same lust of the flesh, that desires to be that and to live that way and to exhibit that to the world and to have some kudos from God because they're able to do it. That sin looked at this book and said, I can do that. Isn't that what they said when he was going to give them the law? Whatever he says, we'll do it. Wasn't very long, they broke the law. It's that deception that comes when you're looking at the words and you're seeing the man to which they do not apply. And you're trying to apply them hard and zealously. How do you make it real? That's how most people try to make it real. When is this thing ever going to reach a consummation? It has. God is satisfied. Are you? I want to make a t-shirt that says it. God is satisfied. What's your problem? But principles. We love principles because they need external proofs. They must have exhibition in the realm of sight and sound for them to ever be true or valid as far as we're concerned. And guess what? We raise our hand and volunteer to be the means of that exhibition. Me, I'll do it. And this leaves the natural man in the picture. And it actually makes him an integral part of God's salvation and God's work in the earth. What's God waiting on? He's waiting on you. What's God waiting on? The manifestation of this. No, He's not. I almost go to that verse when I hear that kind of thing and I read the verse He that sits in the heavens laughs. Why? I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. It's a done deal. They can argue, fuss, try to finish it. Read it in Psalms. He that sits in the heavens laughs. Why? It's done. As far as I'm concerned, it's done. What's the need then? To see what is done. And to see that as who He is in you. Otherwise, it's all going to rest upon you. All of God's hopes rests on you. Otherwise. Knowing the truth brings liberty, because knowing the truth, you'll see that truth has no point of reference in you, has no point of reference in the earth. The religious part of it or the not religious part of it. None of it. Circumcise yourself. Nothing. Don't circumcise yourself. Whoopee. Basically that's what Paul's saying. It doesn't matter. As long as you are the means of this, it doesn't matter. See, that just, we don't get that. The writings were never intended to be a principle for self-application. It was always a promise, a prophecy of one person. A single person, not many living by divine principles, but one person living in many as the embodiment of all divine intention. Now we've talked about principle, person. Person, on the other hand, is much different than principles. While principle needs external evidence and proof, the person is the demonstration. Is the proof. The person shows himself as the evidence, and thereby all other seeming demonstrations are seen to be unnecessary and ineffectual. The city in Revelation has no need of the sun, the moon, or the stars. No need of it. It's not that they're just not there. There's no need for them now. Why? Because the greater light shines in that city. It renders the other unnecessary, ineffectual, not light at all. It's just like the true glory that's come renders the other glory not glorious. Why did you think it was glorious? Because you haven't seen that which exceeds. So what's the answer to this? That's what happened in the heart of Paul. Paul says, by reason of Him I have counted all things as loss. All things as dung. By reason of, as the result of seeing Him. It wasn't I have to get rid of the false stuff before I can experience Him. You can't get rid of the false stuff. You'll just get another batch of better false stuff. You'll get more appropriate principles. Some that's not as blatantly obscene. Instead of talking about a rapture, we'll talk about we're going to manifest the Lord in the earth. We're going to be the second coming to people. That's not bad, is it? That's not perverted. That sounds more spiritual. It has to be exceeded by the greater. Principles well, let me read this. Revelation 20, and I'm applying this to what we're talking about, and it is really applicable to that, because what he's talking about is that first system being taken away. Revelation 20:11, and I saw a throne, a great white one. This is from the Kenneth Wuest translation. I saw a throne, a great white one, and Him who is seated on it from whose face the earth and the heaven fled. That's the first heaven, first earth flees at the presence or the face of that one on the throne. Why? No place was found for them. That simple. The word place here is important. It's the word place here in the Greek means it's defined by its occupant. So when the true occupant comes and takes his true place, there's no place left for anything else. And that's what this is saying. When he is seen, when the face of this one who rules and governs, when this one is seen, there's no room for anything else. It's gone immediately. Why? Not because you had to assess whether it was worthy to stay or not, but because in the presence of the one, what is not is gone. Because he's occupied the place fully. No need, there's no room for it. No room for it. There's no room for your principles, no room for your doctrines, no room for your concepts or your ideas. All there is now is the face of the one on the throne. That's it? Yeah, that's it. Why? Because that's everything. That's it because that's all there needs to be. He defines the place now. What he took away, what flees at his presence, is a system of words, of a God-given expectation that had been taken down to an earthly religion that needed natural exhibition. Look at me, I'm a circumcised Pharisee. And they separated. That's what the word Pharisee means, separated. And they were separated because of their religion. They were holier than the Gentiles. They were holier than these people because they were circumcised and they observed the feasts and the festivals. Read Romans 3 and Paul will tell you how valid that was. Jew and Gentile, they're all the same. There's no advantage. All are under sin. All are condemned by it. There are none that's righteous, none that's holy, none that seek God. All have fallen short, sin, fallen short of the glory. And because they had taken that down, instead of allowing the law to do what it was intended to do and bring them unto him, they had brought it down to an earthly religion, principles to live by. So much so, see, this is what principles allow you to do. Principles are open-ended. Most people think this book is open-ended. You can interpret it. No, there is no interpretation of this book. You can't interpret this. The only interpretation of this book is the revealing of Jesus Christ. Because what we're going to do is interpret it with ourselves in view. So it's going to be a book that's about us. They'd missed the meaning of it all. The meaning was the person. The meaning was never to be defined in who we are or who we could be, but in the I am. The revealed presence of the person. They had no place, no room. The end and the beginning had come. So we're going to talk about that just a moment, just a second. But we've talked about how Paul under the law was bound to principle that he could not perform. He could not bring about the end of those demands or bring about their expectation. He could not fulfill their intention. He never could. He never would have been able to. The only answer for him was what? The law of the Spirit of life. That is the law defined in the life of another. The law embodied, perfected, personified in another man. So now it's the law fulfilled in us, not by us. Now, So what is real? How am I going to make this real? What is real is what demands divine revelation. That's what's real. What's real is that which your hand can't touch and what your eye can't see. What's real, people say, you believe in the literal this or the literal that. Yeah, I do, because the literal is what can't be observed with a natural eye. That's what's real. Because what's real is what can't pass away, fade away, or be made imperfect. If that reality is unknown, and is not the object upon which the gaze of the heart is constrained, we will without fail seek for proof or validity outwardly. The reality, the real, that which is real, demands the senses to be spiritually exercised, or the spiritual senses to be continually exercised, that we may discern between good and evil. And that actually doesn't mean good and evil the way we define it. It means that which is lesser and that which is greater in nature, that which exceeds in nature. Remember when Jesus laid hands on the man that was blind, and the first time he laid hands, he saw men, trees walking. And the second time he laid hands, there was a second that had to come. The second came, the second touch came, and he saw all things clearly. It doesn't say men there in the Greek, and the scripture's not there. Lot will say he saw all men clearly, but it actually says he saw all things clearly, all clearly. He saw things clearly. And the word clearly there means in full light. He saw in full light in the second touch. He saw full light. What'd that mean? The first had man in view. The second doesn't. The first is natural. Afterward, what is spiritual? And that's the transition that has to take place in the heart. And that's the transition that only the seeing of Him can bring about. Because we're going to try to drag man into it and make him somehow a valid part of this. And we can get real specific about how that happens. Well, I was going somewhere else, but let's go here. But this is the whole thing with principles versus the whole thing about our principles and why we love them, and the desire for the principles. Teach me more, please. The reason we love that has to do with our ignorance of the nature, or our desire not to be such, of our salvation. And that's what we read a while ago. It is hidden. And I was taken with that to Exodus 32. And I'm going to spend the rest of the time on this and just talk about a couple things with regard to this. I'm not touching the full of either one of these, but just kind of bringing them together. To listen to the whole thing, go to my podcast. SatisfiedGodPodcast.com. Shameful plug. I'm sorry. Oh, Lord. Okay. Exodus 32 and verse 1. I'm going to read this out of the American Standard, and then Young's Literal. Let's read out of Young's Literal. I have it in both. The people see that Moses is delaying to come down from the mount. And the people assembled against Aaron and said unto him, Rise, make for us gods who go before us, or that we can see. For this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we have not known what hath happened to him. And when I read that, I just saw a real familiar Now here's the man that was really the face of their deliverance. This is the man who brought us out of Egypt. Now he's gone. Now he's not there. Now they can't see him the way they had seen him. They had known him after the flesh. Now they can't know him that way anymore. Now he's hidden from their natural sight, and they are freaking out. And the word there, when it says delayed, Moses delayed, this is more their perspective than Moses. Moses wasn't really delaying his coming. They thought it was a delay. And the word there is real interesting. In the Hebrew, it means disappointment. They were disappointed. Not Moses. They were disappointed that the one that they used to see and that was the face of their deliverance, couldn't be seen that way anymore. He was not evident that way anymore. They were disappointed because they needed some external validation. So what do? They did the very thing we do. They go to the nearest preacher, the nearest priest, and they say, hey, build us a God that we can see. It's no longer God making man after his image, it's man making God after theirs. And so, it's the very thing. Why do you want me to do this? We do not know what's become of this man. We don't know him any longer. We can't see him any longer. Why? Because their knowing of him was always right here or right here. But he was above. He was in the mountain. Now, if they would have been patient and waited, then the truth of the law, the reality of God would have been revealed in their midst. And it would have been revealed, as Daniel says, in a shining face, a face that shines with glory. But they would not wait because they had to have an instant, feel good, here's God, external validation for things. We'll work on that too. Now, here's what he does. I can't see him. I can't feel him. I had that dilemma. I couldn't feel God. I was raised you had to feel God. Feel God. And I remember going in the prayer room, I had to preach that night. And it was real interesting that night because I didn't preach until I could feel something. So I went in that prayer room and I felt nothing. And I started repenting. I don't know what I did. Please forgive me, whatever. I just need this validation that I'm anointed. You know, that type of stuff. And the thing is, I didn't get an answer that night, but later on the Lord began to take me into the Scripture to the Holy of Holies where it was the darkest place. No natural light could come into that place, but the Holy of Holies was the most holy place ever. But no natural light was permitted there. And you know, I would pray, God, why are you so far from me? Why are you so far away? And he's finally spoken to my heart and said, I'm not far from you. Your natural light's no longer permitted here. My presence is not far from you. I'm removing your concept of what it means for me to be present. So I got to have a feeling. I got to have something that validates me. That's what it comes down to. It's not about validating God. It's validating me and my salvation and how good I'm doing. So the disappointment was on their side. I was a disappointed son of a gun, man. I mean, you know, God is satisfied. I'm not. I'm disappointed. That's why we've got to have this extra thing that's got to happen one day, right? It's not because the world needs to see it to prove God. It's most of the time we need to see it to prove it. He was not in their line of sight. They would not wait upon him to come and reveal God's mind. God's law. They needed to give God an image with which they could identify. And guess what? They did. And guess what it looked like? If you go to most historians, they'll say it looked like a god that was served in Egypt. Why? You're always going to deal with God according to what you're familiar with. And it's according to something that was your slave, a bond servant. You're still in slavery, just to a different concept of your God. Now, this is how... This is funny. This is funny. This is when I think this is when Moses comes down and confronts Aaron about it. And we're jumping. There's a lot more to be said, but Exodus 32:23. For they said unto me, make us God. This is Aaron pleading his case to Moses. And they said unto me, make us gods which shall go before us. And again, that before us means we can see it. Visible. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we know not what is become of him. And I said unto them, whosoever hath any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me. And then I cast it into fire, and there came out this calf. Scared all of us. We didn't know what happened. He just jumped right out of the fire. And that's how we do it. We don't want to take any responsibility for our forming of our God, our forming of our idols. But we take plenty of time to do it. And we'll use true things, or we use true things to do it. We have to see something. Knowing not what happened to Moses, man, knowing not, being ignorant. This is the catalyst for all of our production of all of our idols. A man's in the mountain above, with whom the law of God is given and embodied, unknown by those who cannot see him. Their limited perspective could not reach into that unseen realm of the mountain. So they desired to make a lesser similitude of that reality with earthly things. And this is what God calls a great sin. Because what is not of faith is sin. The fact is, they required, like children, to have someone to strike their something upon which to strike their senses. And as the Shekinah, the glory of God of which they had hitherto enjoyed, the sight was now veiled, they wished for some visible material object to behold. But here's this. I mean, the scriptures actually say it, that when they're making this image, it says that he took an engraving tool and formed that thing. And he's telling Moses, it just jumped out of the fire. Most of us have honed our abilities to create our idols, and they look very good. So, but God, see, there's the hiddenness. The hiddenness of Moses, the hiddenness of this thing was answered by idols. And that's what happens the majority of the time with us. That's what was happening in the Colossian letter in chapter 2, chapter 3. Your life is hidden with Christ in God, and he assures them of that. So what are these people doing? They're stepping back into the shadows of an external testimony, trying to exhibit a life that's hidden, or produce the attributes of a life that's hidden. Today I'm going to show the world love. You don't know what love is yet. And when you do see and know what love is, you'll see you couldn't show it on your best day. They have to see Him. Come and see a man. That's the cry of those who have seen Him. Not, come and let me teach you this man. Come and see. You understand, when John is writing the revelation of Jesus Christ, and it's called the revelation of Jesus Christ, not because it's some apocalyptic, futuristic thing, it's because that's what's taking place in the heart of the writer, and it's the thing he's inviting the reader to. He's writing to the church. He knows their persecution. He knows the daily death threats that they're under. He understands all of that. He's calling them up here, up hither. Come and see. Why? It's happening in his heart. He's a man that's been persecuted. He's on an island, banished. I mean, he's not on a beach, sipping margaritas. The man's going through the same tribulation. And yet, God has called his heart up hither. He sees now a realm that is not connected or referenced in sight and sound. And he sees a realm where the Lamb has prevailed. He sits on his throne, where the enemy has been put away, and where the King, who is the Lamb, sits on his throne and his kingdom is established. And he's calling the church to come and see. That's the call. So, I'm about out of time. Let me go here. The hiddenness of truth, the hiddenness of divine reality, unfortunately, will always be answered by the natural mind with the idols that we construct. And this is why Paul says, we who are spiritual, we who are led by the Spirit, we who are walking in faith, we do not see that which is seen. We do not look upon that which is seen, but that which is unseen. Now, he's talking again about the first order of things and the second order of things. And he can walk amidst the first order in which he once gloried, and now having seen the person and not just the principles that pointed to a person, he could look at those things and say they're not real. That's not what's real. You see, that's what Christianity would point to and say that's real. Look at the beauty of the priesthood, the beauty of that the ordinances they're carrying out, the beauty of the encampments. Look at all of that. Isn't that beautiful? That's real. That's got to be real. No, it's not real. He's real. And he's the only thing that's real. And as long as your eyes are beholding that, and that's the thing you're set upon, and that's what defines reality for you, you'll miss reality. And it's a great sin. 2 Peter. Let me end this going here just for a moment. Again, we talked about in these classes, we've been looking at the truth of the words of truth, Proverbs 22. And this has to do with the hiddenness of it. I've written unto you excellent things, wisdom and knowledge, however it's worded, to make thee to know the truth of the words of truth. That's how it's in the Hebrew it can be translated. These are words of truth, which mean they have a true intent. They have a true singular intention, meaning, definition. And they were written for that one purpose, that we may come to know them in their ultimate truth, in their ultimate conclusion. So I began to read Peter, and he says something else. And this is in 2 Peter 2, verse 18. Well, let's start in, we'll start in verse 17. These are wells without water. He's talking about those that would draw them back to the things of the law, really, Judaizers. Wells without water, clouds that are carried with a tempest, to whom the midst of darkness is reserved forever. For when they speak great swelling words of vanity, they allure you through the lust of the flesh, through much wantonness, to those that were clean escaped from them who live in error. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption. Refer that back to Romans 7. For of whom a man is overcome, of the same is he brought in bondage. For if after they have escaped the pollutions of the world through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are entangled again therein and overcome, the latter end is worse with them than the beginning. And we can go to Hebrews in a lot of places there, especially chapter 6, and look at that. But I'm not. I want to go here. They speak great swelling words of vanity. And the question that came to me when I read that, because these words, according to Peter here, are words that's supposed to the hearer, promise them liberty. Promises them a holy, righteous life before God. And Peter calls them swelling words of vanity. I mean, these aren't bad words they're using. I mean, it's not about a cult coming in, you know. It's about something they're familiar with coming back in. So what's the difference between what the Scripture calls words of truth and great swelling words of vanity? The answer is nothing. There is no difference at all. They are the exact same words. The same words. Holiness. Righteousness. Peace, joy, whatever, love. Fullness, manifestation, glory. Same words. What's the difference? What makes one words of truth and what makes the other words of vanity? The man by which they're defined. The face in which you look to find their meaning. That's what makes them words of truth or words of vanity. These are words of truth or words of vanity, whichever you choose. But guess what? The truth of the words are hidden. That's why it's much easier to hold to, accept, and build a doctrine around the vain words. Again, same words, different object. Different face, different definition, wrapped around and embodied in a different man. And because they're hidden from us, we will build the idols, instead of waiting to see the face of the man in whom they're truly defined. The divinely inspired, God-given words are words of truth. Why? Because they had the truth as their ultimate aim and intention, their only aim and intention. Words of vanity is when man gets a hold of those words and tries to use them and apply them and define them and measure them. Then it's empty. Because the words mean nothing until the substance is seen. They mean nothing. And this is what Paul, and we could go into the clean escape part and all of that, but see, we've created idols because we do not know the man who defines these things. We haven't seen the face, the shining, glorious face of the man that defines these realities. We know not this man. Well, you got to have some man that defines a creation. Some man's got to put a name on it. Colossians chapter 2, we go back there, what we read a while ago, that their hearts might be comforted, knit together in love, all riches of the full assurance of understanding, to the acknowledgement of the mystery of God. And the word acknowledge there in the Greek means when you're knowing and participating in what is truly real. That's Theological Dictionary in the New Testament says it that way. When you're truly experiencing what's real. Not just believe it, but experiencing it. It's an acknowledgement. In whom are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So he says it's hidden in him. And I say these things to you basically as a warning. I say these things to you lest any man should beguile you with enticing words. And then he goes on, he says, because do not let man with his vain philosophies, which was all he has, vain philosophies, draw you outside of this place, for in him all fullness is found, and you are complete in him. So those who are complete in him and have all fullness because of his indwelling presence, how can that lend itself to being deceived by a bunch of vain, enticing words? You haven't seen him. You haven't seen the completeness, the completion, the fullness. Why? Because that is hidden. That's what's real. It's hidden from the natural senses, the natural mind, and must be revealed of God. Again, what's real has to be revealed. It has to have divine revelation. And when what's real is seen, what's not real is not. Because it has no more room, no more place. You don't have to assess and point out, I wonder if this is good. I wonder if this is able to stay. Does it have you as its object? Because you can't stay here either. You have no place here. You find that out. You see that. But see, you're not after seeing you have no place. That's not what it's about. It's not about seek God and say, God, show me how dead I am. Show me how much of a loser I am. Show me I have no place here. No, it's show me the one that fills this place. Show me the one who defines this reality. And the other is an automatic understanding that comes in the heart. But your understanding, the understanding that governs you and that becomes effectual in you is, it's Him and all. He's it. Nothing else, no further evidence. I've said many times, the revealing of the Son in the soul needs no further proof. Nothing else. I don't need to look to you to see any evidence of Him. I've seen Him. And thank God I'm still seeing Him. That means we can have fellowship together. Because otherwise, if this not that way, we can't have fellowship together because I'm assessing you. And whether you're worthy of my fellowship or not. So what's these enticing words? Well, the word enticing means plausible. Something plausible, something possible. So when they say you can do this, you can live holy, you can be holy if you do these things. If you give up your hold to the world and you flee the things of the world and you're after God, you can be this. Well, guess what that is? That's enticing words. That sounds plausible. That sounds possible. That sounds like something you can accomplish. And it's vanity. and it keeps your soul veiled by a veil of flesh and ignorance. It keeps your soul veiled from the face, the glorious face in which the fullness of God is seen. Because you're too busy trying to make your face look like a face you've never seen. So, it is here where we find the liberty promised, not just promises of liberty, but the fullness of the liberty that was promised in the knowing of the truth. So, that's enough for this morning. I'm out of time anyway. We'll stop there. For people that's listening, I'll just make the announcement. We're going to have our June conference here. It's the 20th through the 24th of June. So, which is why it's the June conference. Anyway, the 20th through the 24th, that whole week we start Monday night at 7 and through noon on Friday. And so if you guys please set those times aside, come. We'd love to see each of you that can be here. We will be streaming it live, but don't let that be an excuse not to come. And if you need any help getting places to stay, you can call us and we'll help you do that as well. The places are limited around here, believe me. So you might want to get on that pretty quick. So with that being said, we're done.